Laura Thompson, a 35-year-old single mother, lived in a small rented house in suburban Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Her world revolved around her two children, Ethan, aged 10, and Lily, aged 7. Since her ex-husband Tom had left without looking back, Laura was alone in the difficult task of supporting the family. With two jobs, as a cashier at a convenience store during the day and a cleaner at a hospital at night, she barely had time to breathe, let alone think about herself. The neighborhood where they lived was simple, where everyone was too busy with their own lives to notice other people's struggles. The community, although united in appearance, was made up of people who were not very involved in the lives of their neighbors. Laura's house was at the end of a quiet street, lined with ancient trees whose shadows darkened her already difficult days even more. Despite all the difficulties, Laura never allowed herself to complain. His priority was to ensure Ethan and Lily had a happy childhood, even if it meant sacrificing his own well-being. But the bills piled up, and each month was a battle to keep the lights on and food on the table. Winter was approaching, and the thought of facing another season of intense cold without the certainty of how she would pay for the heating kept her awake at night. It was on one of these sleepless nights that Laura, sitting at the small kitchen table, observed her neighbor across the street through the window. Jack Miller was a man in his mid-40s, a war veteran who had recently moved to the neighborhood. He was reserved, spent most of his time alone, and Laura had never had the opportunity to get to know him better. There was something about Jack's quiet demeanor that intrigued Laura, but she was always too busy to make any attempt at friendship. That night, while thinking about how to stretch the little money she had until the end of the month, Laura barely noticed when the tears started to fall. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming, and for a moment, she wondered if things would ever really get better. It was then that a light knock on the door brought her back to reality. When he opened the door, he found Jack, holding a thermos and 2 cups of coffee. He was nervous, as if he were invading her space, but his eyes showed a gentleness that Laura hadn't seen in a long time. "I saw you were awake, and I thought you might want some company," Jack said, his voice soft but full of hesitation. Laura was surprised, not only by the offer, but by the realization that for the first time in months, someone had noticed her existence, and even more so cared enough to take action. She hesitated for a moment but then stepped back, allowing Jack to enter. They sat in the kitchen, and for the first time Laura allowed herself to relax. As they talked, Jack began to recount his own battles. Not the ones he fought abroad, but the ones he faced when he returned home trying to adapt to a normal life after the war. Little by little, Laura realized that he understood what it meant to fight something much bigger than himself, and even more so, how difficult it was to admit that night something changed. Although Laura was still overwhelmed with her responsibilities, she began to realize that perhaps she wasn't as alone as she thought. Jack, in turn, found in Laura and her children a new reason to move forward, a different but equally important mission: to help her rediscover her own courage. The days that followed that night in the kitchen marked the beginning of an unlikely friendship between Laura and Jack. Although they were both used to facing their problems alone, they began to share small tasks and moments, creating a routine that offered them both a little relief. Jack stopped by Laura's house most mornings before heading to work as a security guard at a local factory, always bringing coffee and sometimes a muffin for the kids. Although Jack's constant presence was a source of comfort, Laura was still on edge. The weight of late bills, children demanding more than she could offer, and 2 jobs that drained her physically and emotionally continued to be crushing. Jack realized this, and although he wanted to help more, he himself struggled with his demons, especially the memories of the horrors he had witnessed in the war. One day, upon arriving at Laura's house, Jack found her arguing on the phone. The frustration and desperation in her voice were evident. After hanging up, she broke down in tears, confessing to Jack that she was about to lose her house. The rent was late, and the landlord, impatient and relentless, threatened to evict them. Jack listened in silence, his heart sinking that he couldn't do more. He didn't have the means to pay Laura's debts, but he couldn't bear the thought of seeing her and the show. "Maybe I can talk to him," Jack suggested, although he knew there was little chance of success. "He's not a reasonable man, but I can try to appeal to his human side." Laura nodded, feeling hopeless but grateful for the effort. That afternoon, Jack went to the office of the owner, a portly, cold-faced man named Mr. Reynolds. The conversation was tense from the beginning. Reynolds was relentless, stating that he had given enough time and that other tenants were waiting. Jack tried everything, from appealing to the man's decency to promising that Laura would pay soon, but nothing seemed to soften the owner's heart. "Business is business," said Reynolds dryly and decisively. "If she doesn't pay by the end of the month, she's out." As he left the office, Jack felt defeated, but his determination only grew. He knew that Laura couldn't take another hit, and that made him think of alternatives. Back at Laura's house, he found a woman exhausted and on the verge of giving up. "We'll figure it out," Jack said, his voice firm. "I won't let you lose this house." However, difficulties continued to accumulate. Laura's car, which was already in terrible condition, permanently broke down, leaving her with no means of transport to work. Desperate, she began to consider leaving Milwaukee and moving to her sister's house in Ohio, where she would have a place to stay. But she knew that would mean taking Ethan and Lily away from school and everything they knew. Jack realized how close Laura was to giving up everything. He couldn't offer money, but he could offer something even more valuable: support and a vision of a better future. One night, he asked Laura to take a walk around the neighborhood. As they walked through the silent streets, he began to talk about his own battles, about how after everything he had been through, he too had felt like giving up, just disappearing. "But then I realized that if I didn't fight, what would I be left with? An emptiness. No purpose, no hope," Jack said, looking at the distant horizon. "I'm not going to let you fall into that hole, Laura. Life has dealt you a hard blow, but you have more strength than you know." These words planted a seed of hope in Laura, something she thought she had lost a long time ago. She didn't know how, but she decided she would fight. Jack would help her find a new job with better conditions, and perhaps over time, she would be able to save enough money to resolve her debts. Furthermore, Jack encouraged her to talk to the parents of the other children at school. Perhaps one of them could help with transporting the children. Things slowly started to improve. Laura got a job as an administrative assistant at a law firm, which offered better pay and more flexible hours. Jack remained by her side, offering moral support and helping with the children whenever possible. However, not everything was rosy. Time was running out, and the deadline given by Mr. Reynolds was coming to an end. The tension was growing, and Laura knew that, despite all the improvements, she was still a long way from getting the amount needed to pay off her debts and guarantee her stay in the house. The night before the deadline, Jack showed up at Laura's house with an unexpected proposal. He suggested they fake a medical emergency to buy more time, something Laura initially rejected, but Jack was determined to explore all options. He offered to speak to Mr. Reynolds once again, this time appealing to the landlord's instinct for self-preservation by suggesting that evicting a mother with 2 children at the start of winter could result in bad publicity and legal complications. Laura, exhausted and without alternatives, reluctantly agreed. The next day, Jack went to Reynolds' office, prepared to face the owner's wrath. But to everyone's surprise, something unexpected happened. When Jack re-entered Mr. Reynolds' office, he didn't expect much. The man had been inflexible, and any attempt at negotiation seemed destined to fail. But Jack was a man used to difficult situations. He knew that sometimes the last attempt was the only one left. Reynolds was at his desk, eyes fixed on some documents, but he looked at Jack with an impatient expression as soon as he entered. Before Jack could begin speaking, Reynolds raised his hand, indicating that he wanted to speak first. "Jack, before you say anything, I need to tell you something. After our last conversation, I did some research on Laura's situation," he began unexpectedly. "I learned some things about her past, and it affected me more than I expected." Surprised, Jack remained silent, waiting for the man to continue. "My wife, she left me many years ago. I'm not the easiest man to get along with, I admit. But Laura reminded me a lot of her." Reynolds continued, his eyes focused on some distant point, as if he were reliving old memories. "I saw the same determination in Laura's eyes, that silent strength, trying to hold the whole world on her shoulders. When my wife left, I was angry at the world. I wanted to take it out on everyone around me, and since then, I've done it without don't even notice." Jack wasn't sure what to say. He was faced with a man who suddenly seemed human, vulnerable. It was an unexpected and on some level disturbing change. "I'll make you a proposal," Reynolds finally said with a tired sigh. "Give her another month with no additional interest and maybe we can see how she does. If she can pay off some of the debt, we can negotiate a payment plan." Jack felt relieved and at the same time curious. What could have motivated this sudden change of heart? But he knew this was not the time to question. He thanked Reynolds and left the office, feeling a huge weight lift from his shoulders. When Jack returned home and told Laura about the new arrangement, she was in shock. It wasn't the final solution to their problems, but it was a second chance. One she couldn't waste. In the days that followed, Laura redoubled her efforts. She managed to sell some old objects to raise a little extra money and accepted Jack's help with childcare when she had to work late. She also began reaching out to her neighbors, attending community meetings and asking for help when needed. Something she had never done before. It was during one of these meetings that an unexpected opportunity arose. One of the lawyers Laura worked for was present and, upon hearing her story, offered to review the lease. He discovered several clauses that favored Laura that Reynolds had ignored. With this, Laura gained more time to resolve her situation. Meanwhile, Jack struggled with his own demons. His war past came back to haunt him at night, and he started attending a support group for veterans, encouraged by Laura. This step was crucial for him to begin healing, and it also made him realize that he wasn't just helping Laura, she was also helping to save his life. But like every story of overcoming, the path was full of stones. Reynolds' deadline was approaching again, and Laura still hadn't raised the full amount needed. Anxiety took over her, and for a moment, she almost gave in to the idea of just giving up, moving to her sister's house and starting over somewhere else. But Jack wouldn't allow that. He knew that Laura's real battle was not with the bills or the landlord, but with her fear of failure. Then something surprising happened. The community, which previously seemed indifferent, began to mobilize. Inspired by Laura's determination and the friendship she had developed with Jack, neighbors began organizing a garage sale, donating items and helping to raise funds. Even those who knew little about Laura felt touched by her struggle and wanted to contribute in some way. On the day of the sale, Jack and Laura were surprised by the support from the community. People she barely knew came to offer help, and the event was a bigger success than anyone could have imagined. When the money was counted, Laura had almost enough to pay off her debt to Reynolds. Almost. Jack, watching Laura handle it all with a grace and strength he could hardly believe, made a decision. That night he went to the bank and withdrew what little he had saved over the years. It was all he had, but he knew Laura and the children needed it more. The next day, Jack went to Laura's house and handed her the remaining money. Laura, on the verge of tears, tried to refuse, but Jack insisted. "Laura, you gave me something I didn't know I needed. A purpose, something to fight for. Let me do that for you. It's not charity, it's friendship." With the amount in hand, Laura went to Reynolds' office, ready to close this chapter of her life. She paid off the debt, and the owner, although surprised by the community's mobilization, accepted payment without objection. The battle was far from won, but Laura and Jack had overcome their biggest obstacle together. What began as a lonely struggle had transformed into a story of mutual support, strength, and above all, courage. With the debt paid off and the threat of eviction removed, Laura was finally able to breathe a little easier. But she knew the journey was far from over. The experience of the last few weeks had left deep marks on both her and Jack, but it had also brought out a strength they didn't even know they had. In the days that followed, Laura's routine began to stabilize. With her new job, she not only had a better salary, but she was also able to spend more time with Ethan and Lily, something she had always wanted. The garage sale had brought Laura closer to her neighbors, creating bonds she never expected to form. For the first time, she felt like she was part of a real community, where people looked out for each other. Jack, on the other hand, was on his own journey of overcoming. Through the veteran support group, he began to confront the traumas that had haunted him since returning from the war. The sessions were painful, filled with memories he had tried to bury. But with the support of Laura and the new friends he made in the group, Jack began to find a way to live with his past, rather than be consumed by it. One night, as the two were sitting on Laura's porch watching the children play in the yard, Jack finally shared with her a part of his story that he had never told anyone. "In the war, I lost many friends, Laura," he began, his voice filled with an ancient heaviness. "But what hurts me most is that when I came back, I couldn't reconnect with the world. I felt like a ghost, living a life that wasn't really mine. When I met you, I was almost giving up on everything." Laura was silent, absorbing his words. She knew Jack carried deep scars, but hearing that made him seem even more human. Someone who, despite everything, chose to help someone else rather than wallow in his own pain. "You gave me a reason to keep going, to fight," he continued, looking at her with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "I wanted to help you, but I ended up helping myself too." These words resonated deeply with Laura. She had spent so much time trying to be strong for her children that she forgot what it was like to be taken care of, how good it felt to have someone to count on. For the first time, she allowed her own walls to fall, allowing vulnerability to show her the power of true human connection. As Jack and Laura supported each other, something else began to blossom between them. It wasn't just friendship or gratitude, it was something deeper, a mutual understanding that went beyond words. But, as they were both dealing with their own challenges, they decided not to force anything, allowing the relationship to evolve naturally. However, the personal growth they were both experiencing did not come without challenges. Ethan, Laura's oldest son, began having problems at school, showing signs of anxiety that worried Laura. He had witnessed his mother's stress and was now dealing with his own fears in a confusing way. Laura, realizing that she needed to pay more attention to her son, decided to seek help for him, something she had never considered before, due to stigma and lack of time. With Jack's support, Laura found a child therapist who began working with Ethan. Little by little, the boy began to open up about his worries, the fear of losing his home, his father's absence, and the pressure he felt to be strong like his mother. These sessions not only helped Ethan, but they also served as a catalyst for Laura, who realized that part of the strength she was rediscovering also involved accepting that she sometimes needed help, and that didn't make her any less strong. Meanwhile, Lily, the youngest, began to excel at school, showing a natural talent for music. Laura, seeing how much music brought her daughter joy, was keen to find a way to support this talent, despite financial difficulties. She was able to get a small discount on piano lessons in the community, thanks to the help of a neighbor who had become a close friend. This new phase in Laura's life brought many reflections. Sitting in the kitchen at night after putting the kids to bed, she often found herself thinking about how things had changed in such a short time. Life still wasn't easy, but there was a fundamental difference. She now had a support network, a renewed purpose, and the courage to move forward, no matter what the future brought. And Jack, who had previously lived isolated in his own world of pain, now saw himself not just as a veteran trying to survive, but as part of a family, albeit unofficially. He began to become more involved in community activities, finding meaning in small acts of kindness and in being a constant, reliable presence in Laura and the children's lives. Overcoming for both was not a linear path, but rather a series of small steps, daily achievements, and the acceptance that they did not need to face everything alone. There were good days and bad days, but with each obstacle overcome, their confidence in themselves and each other grew. Laura, who once feared the future, now looked at it with hope. Jack, who had previously been stuck in the past, now saw possibilities where before there had been only despair. Together, they rediscovered not only courage, but also the joy of living. Winter in Milwaukee arrived with relentless force, blanketing the city in a thick layer of snow and bringing with it a biting cold that seemed to infiltrate every corner. For Laura, the last few months had been a constant battle, but also one of great personal and family victories. Despite the advances, there was still a shadow that hung over his life, the uncertain future. The law firm where Laura worked underwent a reorganization, resulting in staff cuts. Although Laura didn't lose her job, her hours were reduced, which meant less money to support the household. At the same time, expenses continued to mount, with heating bills rising, children's needs increasing, and the pressure to keep everything in order weighing heavily on their shoulders. For Jack, winter also brought challenges. His progress in the veteran support group was significant, but he still struggled with sleepless nights and intrusive memories of the war. However, he remained steadfast by Laura's side, helping her with everything he could, from taking care of the children to making minor repairs around the house. They formed a strong team, but they both knew that winter would be a decisive test of their resilience and unity. The situation became critical in mid-January when the heater in Laura's house broke. With the severe cold, the house became uninhabitable without adequate heating. Desperate, Laura tried everything she could to get a quick repair, but the costs were too high, and she simply didn't have the money. While Laura searched for solutions, Jack was always by her side offering support. He suggested that she and the children temporarily move into his house, but Laura, proud, hesitated. She didn't want to be a burden or seem like she was taking advantage of his kindness. Jack, noticing Laura's internal conflict, tried to convince her, saying that her house was big enough and that it would only be a temporary solution. That night, as Laura lay awake in bed, feeling the cold seep through the walls, she finally gave in. She knew she needed to think about the children and that she couldn't go on like this. The next morning, with a mixture of relief and apprehension, she accepted Jack's offer. Temporarily moving into Jack's house was a new experience for everyone. Ethan and Lily adapted quickly, seeing it almost as an adventure. But for Laura and Jack, the arrangement brought up feelings they had both been trying to ignore. There was an inevitable closeness, a sharing of space that, while bringing them closer together, also forced them to confront how they really felt about each other. One night after putting the kids to bed, Jack and Laura sat on the couch in the living room. The fireplace was lit, casting a soft, warm light over the room, contrasting with the relentless cold outside. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was filled with unsaid things. "I don't know how to thank you for all this, Jack," said Laura, finally breaking the silence. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and confusion. "You've done so much for me and the kids. I just don't know how to repay you." Jack shook his head, a gentle smile on his lips. "Laura, you have already given me more than I could ever ask for. You gave me a reason to keep going, a family I never imagined I would have. This is more than enough." They were silent for a moment, but the emotions that had been suppressed for so long began to overflow. Jack, with his heart racing, took Laura's hand in his. "The truth is that I care about you a lot, Laura. And with the children too. I'm not just here to help. I'm here because I want to be." Laura felt tears begin to form in her eyes, not from sadness, but from a mixture of relief and recognition. "I care about you too, Jack. More than I want to admit because it scares me. I'm afraid of depending on you too much, of losing control of my life." Jack gently squeezed her hand, his eyes meeting hers with raw honesty. "You're not losing control, Laura. You're finding a new way of living, one where you don't have to carry the entire world alone." The tension between them slowly dissipated, replaced by mutual understanding. At that moment, they both realized that they weren't just helping each other overcome obstacles. They were building something new, something that could last beyond the difficulties of the present. However, the reality of the outside world did not wait for them. A few days later, while Laura was at work, she received an urgent call from the hospital. Ethan had been in an accident at school, a fall during recess that resulted in a broken arm. Laura's heart almost stopped when she heard the news. She rushed to the hospital, where she found Ethan scared but trying to be brave. Jack arrived soon after, his reassuring presence bringing some calm to the chaos. As they waited for Ethan to be seen, Jack stood by Laura's side, offering comfort with his simple presence. When they were finally allowed to take Ethan home, Jack suggested they return to his home, where he could help Laura care for the boy during his recovery. This painful and stressful experience served as the culmination of Laura and Jack's journey. She saw once again how vital Jack had become in her life, not just as a friend, but as someone she could truly trust, someone who was there not just in the good times, but also in the worst. That night, after putting Ethan to bed, Jack and Laura met again in the living room, but this time there was no hesitation. They knew their lives were intertwined in a way neither could ignore. What began as a solitary struggle to survive had transformed into a partnership based on trust, respect, and a silent love that grew every day. Laura finally realized that giving up control was not a sign of weakness, but of strength. the strength of trusting someone and accepting that sometimes needing help is the greatest proof of courage you can give. Winter began to give way, and with the arrival of spring, Laura and Jack's lives also began to blossom in new ways. Things that had once seemed unbearable were now seen with new eyes, strengthened by the experience and unity they had cultivated. Ethan recovered well from the accident, and the support he received from Jack during his convalescence solidified their connection. Ethan, who previously carried a lot of anxiety in his little heart, began to open up more, not only to his mother, but also to Jack, who he now saw as a father figure. Lily, always cheerful and full of life, felt safer and happier than ever, especially with Jack becoming a constant presence in their lives. The heater was finally fixed, and Laura was able to return to her home, but the temporary move into Jack's house had left a lasting impact. It no longer made sense for her and the children to live separately from someone who was now so important in their lives. With a mixture of hesitation and hope, Laura and Jack began to discuss the possibility of becoming a real family. Spring brought more than flowers, it also brought new opportunities. Laura, with the support of Jack and her community, decided to return to school. She enrolled in an evening business course, determined to improve her situation and provide a more secure future for her children. It was a brave step, but with the support network she now had, Laura felt capable of taking on any challenge. Jack, in turn, found a new calling by becoming more involved with the veteran support group. He began helping others who, like him, were struggling to adjust to civilian life. Jack's experience, combined with the emotional support he had found in Laura and the children, gave him renewed purpose. He realized that by helping others, he was also healing himself.
A year had passed since that difficult winter, and life had changed drastically. Laura, now more confident and determined, was about to complete her course, with plans to look for a better job soon. The community continued to be a constant source of support, and Laura became an active figure, participating in local events and helping others who were struggling, as she once had been.
Jack and Laura decided it was time to take things a step further. They combined the two families into one, with Laura and the children moving permanently into Jack's house. Laura's fear of depending too much on someone else was gone, replaced by the certainty that true strength lay in accepting help and building a life based on trust and love. Jack and Laura's wedding was a simple but meaningful event. Surrounded by friends, neighbors, and their children, they celebrated not only their union, but also overcoming all the adversities they faced together. Ethan and Lily, beaming with joy, saw in Jack the father they always wanted, and in Laura, the mother who never gave up. The house, now full of life and laughter, was a symbol of everything they had achieved. The harsh winter had passed, but instead of weakening, it had strengthened the bonds between them. The journey that began with fear and uncertainty ended with a new perspective. That true courage is not in facing everything alone, but in allowing others to share the burden and in accepting the love that comes from being vulnerable. 2 years have passed since Laura and Jack joined together in a new life together. Jack's little house, which had once seemed so lonely, was now overflowing with energy and love. Ethan and Lily flourished with the stability and affection that surrounded their new family. Laura, now a business graduate, got a job at a local company where her skills were valued and where she finally felt like she was building something solid for her children's future. She became a respected figure in the community, known for her strength and for always being willing to help anyone in need. Jack, in turn, continued his work with veterans, but also found time to pursue other passions, such as gardening and carpentry. He transformed the house's backyard into a vibrant garden, where the children loved to play, and where he and Laura spent many evenings in quiet conversations, remembering the path that brought them there. Life, which was once full of uncertainty and difficulties, was now marked by moments of joy and gratitude. The challenges still existed, but Laura and Jack had learned that together they could face anything. They had rediscovered the courage that had always been within them, and that courage had not only helped them survive, but also helped them build lives they never imagined possible. As they watched Ethan and Lily run around the garden laughing and playing, Laura and Jack exchanged a look that said more than words could ever express. It was a look of recognition, of deep love and a shared understanding, that in each difficulty overcome, they had found not only strength but also a new form of happiness. The future was still unknown, but now they faced it with confidence, knowing that together they could overcome any obstacle. Life had shown them that despite difficult times, there was always a new season, a new chance to start again. And in this new life, each day was a celebration of the courage, love, and union they built together.